And as we start off on that, I would just ask my colleagues in the processing room, which is a very big room with a lot of people behind the team, to just play with us the video from Honorable Paul Raymond Cortes, who is the Consul General of the Philippines to Dubai and Northern Emirates, as well as to the United Arab Emirates. Please stay with us, and you are welcome to unmute yourselves so that we can focus on the video for a couple of minutes. Thank you. Feroz, over to you.
Well, first and foremost, allow me to express my appreciation to William Goyes of allowing me to be a part of this wonderful webinar where Migrant Forum in Asia, together with the Cross-Regional Center for Refugees and Migrants, the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, and the Civil Society Action Committee, who are jointly organizing this 23-part series of a weekly review discussion on the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration Objectives. I have been asked specifically to speak on the issues and challenges of our migrant workers on account of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the responses and the roles of the foreign missions here in the destination country to help out our migrants. Obviously, the first issue that was faced by our migrants were their losses in employment, either permanent or temporary. Many of our migrants have been asked to go on a furlough or a no work, no pay scheme, or a reduced salary because of the closure or the temporary closure of their offices or employment areas. Obviously, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, many of the businesses, restaurants, the hotels, or many of our migrants' work had to close down due to the lack of clients, due to the lack of people patronizing these businesses, and the companies have a difficult time trying to keep up with the salaries or their emoluments due them, and as such, they were either asked to reduce their salaries or asked to go on a lesser number of work hours. And for those of our migrants who had lost their jobs, it was already a difficult time for them because now they had to think about going back home in the Philippines because they had no way of sustaining themselves here in Dubai or in the UAE, and they asked for repatriation. And the first issue there would be whether there were enough flights at all from the UAE to the Philippines, bearing in mind that both countries and the global community, for that matter, all the airports in the world had shut down to international air flights. And this was an issue for many of our migrants because some of them had to wait for flights until it had resumed. And while waiting for these flights, of course, the issue then would be where would they get their food, where would they get their money to pay for their accommodations. Remember, again, keep in mind that none of them, or many of them had lost their jobs or had been forced to take on a lower salary due to the closure of their work areas, and thus the accommodation payments, the food provisions for food and all that, and even the financial obligations, the credit card dues and so forth and so on, both here in the UAE and in the Philippines was an issue for many of our migrants. And along with that, there were also some of our migrants who had begun to, since they had lost their jobs or the companies had let them go and their visas, of which they were part of, had now been cut off. And here come the issues on the overstay fines and immigration problems and even unpaid claims of end-of-service benefits for our migrants. These are the concerns, the legal concerns that were an issue to them on account of the pandemic. And of course, notwithstanding, there were health issues as well. Many of our migrants were infected or had become positive with the COVID-19 virus. And of course, something that is very difficult to measure the mental health issues of many of our migrants, many had been locked down inside their homes, many of them staying with 10 to 15 other roommates or flatmates, and of course that poses an issue as far as health is concerned, as far as mental issues are concerned, and if and when they get hospitalized, either because of COVID-19 or any other medical on any medical account, then the what do you call it, the issues pertinent to the hospital expenses have become very prevalent. Now, what was the role of the Philippine Consulate General and the Philippine Embassy and many of our labor office in trying to alleviate these issues faced by our migrants? Of course, first and foremost, they had nobody to run to, and the first people that they would be running to is the Philippine government, which would be us here in Dubai and the Northern Emirates, and we would be trying to reach out to them, to our overseas Filipinos, to our clientele, to the community and other stakeholders in trying to find ways and solutions to help our fellow Filipinos in need. And in addition to that, also we had to coordinate very, very closely, let's say, with the UAE government health authorities, the police, and trying to find out what measures could be done to help them. And of course, to remind them of the health protocols as well. We had come up with, the 24 hotline service. We have to try to make sure that all avenues for communication would work. So either WhatsApp, Facebook messaging, by phone, by SMS, by text, and whatever social media would be available for them, just for us to find out exactly what they needed and how we could be of assistance to them. Along with that, there were issues with regard to trying to facilitate and coordinate their legal and financial concerns, let's say, with the companies or their employers. Obviously, when many companies closed, it was difficult for them to settle money claims or end of service benefits. We tried to talk to the employers. We tried to exchange views on how this could work for both the employer and the employee. Obviously, when many companies had shut down, many did not have enough funding, or they had less monies to settle the end of service benefits for the employees that they had laid off. And there were also questions about immigrations. How are we going to formalize or systematize, extending their stays here? In early April, the UAE had come up with a provision that would allow those with overstaying visas to stay on a little longer until the end of December 2020. But that was since moved earlier again to, if I remember right, July, and then August, and then November, and then now December. So this was an issue for a lot of people. Where do they get the money to pay for their come up with new or extended visas or stays in the UAE, and how do we facilitate the procedures for bringing them back home in the Philippines? At a certain point, there were only very, very few flights between Dubai and the UAE. Between Dubai and the Philippines, and there were also issues with regard to the number of people that the Philippines can accept, because we were looking at the whole diaspora wanting to go back home, not just the people from the GCC, not just the Filipino community from the GCC, but even from those in the various parts of the world, seafarers in particular in Europe, in the US, and in Asia, and so forth and so on. So this also put a strain in trying to determine how best to make sure that we are allowing our people to go back home. At the same time, keeping in mind health protocols that have been in place back home in the country. And of course, apart from this, we also needed to come up with the provision of free legal advice for many of our migrants who would come to us and seek clarification on how best they could resolve their own situation. And one thing that was very difficult to provide it was the provision of psychosocial services, something that we were not very, very quick to do. In fact, in the Philippine Consulate Office, we have one lady from the Department of Social Welfare and Development, or the DSWD in the Philippines, who would act as the social welfare attaché. And she would, in addition to psychosocial services, would also provide basic needs for the displaced, distressed, vulnerable, and even medically affected overseas Filipinos. We would partner with local grocery and retail suppliers for basic for food, for rice, for sugar, for eggs, for canned goods. And obviously, this was not enough to, for over 500, 600,000 Filipinos in Dubai alone. And it was an issue as far as budget is concerned. But of course, we also need have the community to work side by side with the consulate, with the labor office, with our social welfare attaché, in trying to reach out to as many distressed overseas Filipinos as possible. Manila had also come up with a basic financial assistance, or ACAP, which they gave out to those who had been terminated from work or those on a no work, no pay scheme. This was from a budget of the Department of Labor and Employment, but this was not specifically only for the distressed Filipinos in the UAE, but globally. And because it was global, you have finite resources. There was only a number of beneficiaries set per country. And in the case of Dubai, it first began with 6,000, and then 12,000, and then 22,000. And we're still waiting for quite a number of additional packages. Remember also in Dubai, about 97,000, 98,000 had applied for this one-time financial assistance of $200. Of course, we also had to do some hospital visitation for many of our Filipinos who had been hospitalized for various reasons, not for COVID reasons, but for those, let's say, for heart attack or any other of their medical concerns. At the end of it all, there was much that was expected of the missions. It's a catch-all service provider, a shock absorber for everything that the Filipinos needed here in the UAE, while awaiting for things to ameliorate. And this was a very difficult time, and it still is, for many of our personnel, because many had also been affected and were shocked, and it was something that the whole world was not prepared to do. And as such, it was quite interesting to find out how best both the host government and the Philippine missions, or the missions of the nationals in the host country, could work together. And let me just give you a slight example of what we had done. When in the middle of the pandemic, when people were begging for food assistance, we had coordinated very, very closely with Dubai Police in trying to distribute cooked food to our nationals. Remember also, it was very, the UAE is very, very strict about distribution of food, especially one that did not pass through health protocols and sanitation procedures. And so we needed to be very clear that the distribution of food needed to be in partnership with the local authorities to make sure that there are no legal issues involved in trying to distribute. So the Dubai Police would ask us for a list of the Filipinos, and we would give them the list to the police so that they would distribute the cooked food, the biryani, to many of our nationals at their places of domicile. And it was a beautiful partnership that lasted throughout Ramadan, and even after Ramadan. And it's one of the great partnerships and collaborations between the missions we have here in the host country and the government, the host government for that matter. It's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing pandemic. And so the partnership could not just end as that. And we have to be very clear also with our people that everyone has to extend a little sort of patience, and it's something very difficult for a lot of our people to understand, because when you're at the edge of your rope, and it's just difficult to grope for more space to keep your lifeline intact. But we're very grateful to the Filipino community, because not only have the select members of the Filipino community leadership rise up to the challenge of being more proactive. They've also partnered very, very closely with the Philippine consulate in trying to ensure that we have more people to reach, we have more people to make understand what exactly our role is in trying to do this pandemic. And we'd like to open the floor for those who'd like to find out more about how the missions were able to cope. It's an ongoing process, as I said. But again, thank you very much to Migrant Forum in Asia for allowing us this opportunity to be a part of this beautiful 23-part webinar. Thank you very much, and mabuhay!
Well, Inatsesha, thank you very much for that video. I am hoping that Ambassador Islam will be able to join us a little bit later on for us to have a Q&A. I think he brought out some very interesting points there. It feels as though just looking through what the Global Compact recommends as actions, the Philippines seems to be taking a step well ahead into addressing some of those concerns, and particularly, looking at this whole element of having transparent systems around how they will support migrants, so that also helps in terms of the accountability side. So I see these things sort of matching together, but also that brings in the role of what the migrants themselves have to put in, because it's also very important to show here that migrants have a responsibility in ensuring that the wheel is oiled in the right way.